Come on. Um, we are about to be recorded and everything's going. Thanks very much, Brian. Really nice to meet everybody from different countries, and that's very exciting in itself. Um, Following on from making a few comments, I'm understanding that Robbins and Elvis will share from their very fresh and emerging experience. And so I'll try to keep this as brief as possible. As I think back to that experience of being in Zambia during the early onset of the AIDS epidemic back in the mid-1980s, one thing that stood out very clearly is that this epidemic was going to be bigger than any of us could ever manage with systems. It was skyrocketing forward. It was like a steamroller. It was enveloping the country through the late 1980s. And we were starting to interact with it quite early on, but we recognized retrospectively what was going on, like a lot of other mission hospital folks and government hospital folks back in the day. One thing that became very clear is that we had to find our way back into the homes and the neighborhoods of people, because that's where the power obviously was to lie. It had been there, it was going to be there in the future. We needed to rely on that strength that is often hidden from health systems people, right? And even church structural people, because we tend not to get out the door often enough to actually get into the local setting to really hear the story. With HIV onset, we had to do that much more if we were to have a strategic grasp of future response. We did it. We found that through the later years of the 1980s, that not only could families respond in the home setting, but that neighborhood could respond as well, given that the team that was doing the accompaniment had the mind for it, and that they could continue to keep learning as to how to facilitate that shared ownership of the concern, but also the hope for the future that families and neighborhood community needed to really have. So the origins of SALT, from my perspective, comes from that experience. I was in a way pushed into local, real-life, face-to-face community engagement by the rapid onset of the AIDS epidemic. Early in the experience of that, we had so many contacts with people in Lusaka and other parts of the world, and we started to set up experiential learning visits. One comes to mind: the Minister of Health, Dr. Ngelasani of the day, was coming to visit because he heard something was going on and it was very controversial. He was kind of ambushed in a positive way on the way to the hospital. We met him halfway there, and we managed to set up a visit to a family that was living with HIV. And I remember very well Dr. Ngelasani meeting the family and then being handed a bowl of food by the family and by the young woman who was living with AIDS. This really shifted his perspective. And that has been repeated in terms of an experiential learning result by people in levels of power and authority. That's been repeated thousands of times worldwide, because experiences like that have added up to help us understand that experiential learning is an underpinning of really good program development anywhere in the world. But what did we want to call it? We didn't call it anything. Winding forward to the year of 1999, I was part of a UN AIDS group by that time, not working for them, just getting alongside. And at the AIDS conference in Zambia that was held in Lusaka that year for the region of Africa, the Technical Network Development Unit of UNAIDS got me in together with them, and together with a large group of people, including the HIV/AIDS Alliance of the UK and other groups, we came up with this shared definition of human capacity development. They were really worried about the personnel issue in those days. It shifted ground, though, from seeking numbers to seeking quality of response. And the definition that came out was that human capacity development was about the will, skills, and abilities of people, not just getting more people to do the work. So with that in mind, in 2003, in continuing to work with the people from that unit, from time to time. I met Dr. Usa Dongsa from Thailand. She was the lead for the AIDS education program at the University of Chiang Mai, and she had been doing a process in parallel called SALT. And so I attribute the word SALT to Usa, good friend, and she used it as a mnemonic in those days, support and learning team. She was setting up, taking people from districts in Thailand to local settings to hear the story of local community. Now, it was very effective and she was very excited, but it took a friend in the Technical Network Development Unit to get us all connected, get together with a partner from British Petroleum, BP. And so a very strange partnership took place, and it became grounded in a growing understanding of what this SALT thing was going to be all about. From my perspective, in working globally with the Salvation Army, I saw this as a huge opportunity to continue doing what we'd been doing, but to capture it in a word that would continue to grow in terms of its meanings around approaches, dispositions, and actual methodologies. So that now, as we begin to look at the word SALT, it can and does mean a number of different things. And so I'll just show a few pictures. Are we okay with that, Brian? Can you see the slide all right?
Yes, yes. Yeah.
Okay. Let me go back to just the beginning of this thing, and to say that I won't show too many of these slides, but it's just to capture a few patterns. The first pattern that SALT had captured over these preceding many years, since, for me at least, since the early 1980s through until the 2000s and then beyond, is that we had to find a way with critical health and life and faith issues. We had to find a way to engage in the living space as well as the working space and the gathering space. So the intersection of these circles shows symbolically the necessity, from my experience and many others as well, that these circles need to interconnect. They cannot be separate. And it has implications for the way we design work, the way we personally participate, and the way we choose to learn. Just very quickly moving on, Elvis may well find some time to help bring about the underpinnings of SALT by the discipline of asking the question amongst everyone who gathers, and a question that we carry into the home and the neighborhood environment when we have these conversations that draw out the story of local people. We have to ground it in the question of who am I? We have to be people with people, and Elvis may have time to go on with that a bit more. It raises the other much more fundamental question of what do we believe about people? And we had learned through responding to AIDS and then other issues, particularly as time went on with things like Ebola, with COVID, but on the way, addictions and abuse of all kinds of substances that cause conflict in local community. These are just some examples of the entry point conflict-laden issues that bring out not so much the weaknesses of people, which are easy to see, but the strengths that we need to continue to look for across the cultures, across the faiths, across the localities. And we've learned to always enter into a conversation in the home environment and the neighborhood environment and in the facility that we come from ourselves, be it a church or be it a clinic or be it a hospital, to always look for the strengths that are inherent within us, the care as presence, the community as belonging, the change that is not forced but facilitated, the leadership that is servant and influence-bearing in nature, and the hope that is generated by the confidence that comes from a shared learning that comes out of the kind of conversations that we're talking about. This is just a little example of a gathering of story in Ethiopia that took place in the last couple of years. You'll see those environments of home and outside the home, and with some of the co-facilitators who had joined from China, from Hong Kong and China, as well as from some other parts of Africa. So, you can sort of just see by image the fact that this is a strong shared learning experience. There were church people in the midst, and they visited this particular family and others, and they were totally shocked to see that their welfare efforts, well-intended though they were, had done nothing much more than increase the sense of indignity felt by the local people, because they were so poor, and they were, in a way, it's a long story, but they were feeling so dependent on the welfare provision from the local church that they just couldn't lift themselves up. And this Ethiopian interaction led to a very distinct change, a real rotation of the axis, and everybody changed as a result. The mentality is all about moving from come to us to let's go out together. And so transferring that to different country contexts, this happens to be a picture taken from inner London in the UK, in Stepney. And it's a result of the going out that people are coming in. So this happens to be a church base. That's actually not even a church. It's a school room, but for a local church that was doing the going out. This is another European example in Slovakia of a kindergarten, a home visit environment, a neighborhood interaction. Something happens that softens everything, and the healing is explicitly understood, not just as accompaniment and doing things about health in a toxic waste environment surrounding this community, but the healing is all about entering into the shared space of God's Spirit. And that's an example of how that happened. What's interesting in this case is that the conversation was continued into the policy circles of Bratislava, the capital city. And this is with a particular group of Roma people. And so the policy people got strongly involved in this conversation and still are. So this is an example of change happening through intersecting and interweaving those three circles, looking for the strengths of people and getting to talk together as a team about how it worked for us. Now, we've talked about the need to do SALT, stimulate stories, appreciate strengths, learn through listening, and do it as a team. And in doing so, we find some special things about SALT practice that might happen with a team of 2 or 3 or 4 people. Usually 3 is a maximum in my experience, but sometimes particular contexts can take more. But we find that trust is the best thing that comes out of this. Connection in community builds. Learning and sharing is understood by everybody to be going on. Inclusion of people instead of leaving people out is a critical thing. And so there's some of the, if you like, the immediate outputs of SALT experience in our experience, summarized in this kind of slide where the center is there, there's two-way traffic. But the big thing about SALT is that expansion happens in 2 directions. That's the experience. It happens locally if those coming in from the outside, from a clinic or a church or a team from any outside situation, have a mind for helping the connectivity happen laterally and being prepared to facilitate that connection. It means adapting, it means putting time into that. But at the same time, the people who come from the center go back to that center and they do their work differently. They look down a microscope differently. They do nursing differently. They do medical consultation differently. They do chaplaincy differently or administration. And that is what it's about. I won't go into this, but SALT for the person of faith is a spiritual discipline. And it's a shared spiritual discipline. That's where team life in SALT brings out deeper spiritual embedding in all of us. So it's not just about going out and listening to story and finding the faith river of life begin to flow because people trust differently and people kind of express care differently and a love kind of grows. Therefore, this opens a window in which we see God better, right? But it happens in us as well. This is a shared journey of change. And I think that's the critical point that I'm going to try to make about SALT. I think Robbins and Elvis will spend more time on this. in terms of the how-to and the process of. But I simply want to say that if we're going to go for the story of people, we need to begin with an understanding that God is present already. We need to be aware of a counseling approach in a really basic form. This is not an intervention. It's not a survey. We're going to explore through good questioning the concerns that people have, the hopes that people have, the ways of working they have in order to survive, to move on, to make life fulfilling, and to face challenges, because we have to learn from people about how they work, not what they do so much as how they work, how they think, in order for us to grow and in order for us to adapt programming in a way that catches up with the way local family, local community, local groups think and do their thing, even before any of us came along. The critical thing with SALT is that as a team goes out and does a conversation, facilitates it in a setting where somehow it's been bridged, and again, Elvis and Robbins will probably talk about the necessity of some sort of bridging into a local setting. The debrief is really critically important. If it doesn't happen, you lose the learning. We have to ask 3 sets of questions. We have to say, what strengths did we see today in the people that we visited? How did we do as a team? What strengths have come out in us? And then how did we see God today that was really surprising? And so that's how it works. But I do want to, before I finish, Brian, just allude to one other strategic grounding for SALT practice. SALT is a catalyst to local community conversation. And there's another process that builds from it, which is community counseling. I won't go into that right now, but it alludes to the fact that you can't just go and leave. You have to be prepared to go back and see a propagation of a movement of care and change locally. But at the same time, you can't just keep doing that from one clinic, repeatedly all over the place. You run out of speed and time and puff. You can't do it. You need to bring about clusters of people that actually intentionally facilitate this local response and its potential for transfer. That's what we have tended to use the word facilitation team for. It's about helping connection between local responses, but it takes a bit of art, it takes a bit of discipline, it takes a lot of experience. And as that facilitation team emerges in different forms, and I show you one example from Ethiopia here, where Tia Fund gets together on the right, we have a local church person, we have a project partner from Hong Kong. They get together and they're shaping up a facilitation team approach that actually has been sustained in this particular example in Ethiopia over the last 3 years. Clusters of people come out of the local experience, get together, and intentionally seek to try to respond to invitations that come from somewhere else and bring out the same pattern of response in that place, out of which come more experienced facilitators who are willing to join together and go visit other people who are wanting to go in the same direction. You need, in a particular setting, say of a population of 100,000 people, you need to have a mind for local facilitation teams that will be able to support over a period of a year at least 6 to 10 community responses. But if you keep adding that up and you go year by year by year, you can begin to count and you begin to see that it can go to scale. It's not through scaling up the intervention, it's by scaling out the response by good, skilled facilitation team development that in itself is grounded in SALT practice. If the facilitation team does not do SALT itself, it goes dry and it dies away. I'm only going to show 1 or 2 other things. This question of how do we see God, it really comes out, it's really very important. I want to give a global scope to this. Here's a picture from China where the addiction issue is really huge, especially just north of the Indian and the Myanmar border. That's an example of SALT reflection happening in a family. This is a picture from Haiti, youth in Haiti responding to HIV and other critical issues. They're responding because they're part of a SALT approach. They're showing agency, they're showing leadership. This is Brazil. I want to take you outside of our home environments into other places as well, and to say that this is a global thing. In our own home setting, in the UK, working with the Salvation Army around the town of Woking, we've had a lot to do with the recovery community, people moving through addiction. And the gentleman on the left is a good friend now named John. And it's just a quote from John. He says, I met some guys near the beach in Bournemouth. We went running. Our conversation was sharing of story, my recovery journey. Theirs about being at a men's retreat arranged by a particular organization. They opened up. Truth was felt. Trust and connection emerged. We felt freedom. And I think that is the issue. There's a lot of things changing. This is too analytical to go into, but I won't. But I'm just saying that institutionally, health systems and church faith systems really need to step up into a shared change process globally. Arukah is part of that. I was really privileged to be part of the emergence of the cluster, the Gwembe cluster in Zambia a few years ago, and it's going from strength to strength. And I'm really just wanting to say how important that is, how encouraging that is, and how much of a demonstration it is. Sorry if I've taken too long. I think I have, but away we go. Over to you, Brian. We're done.
Thank you, Ian. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. It's a lot to unpack, really. Just reminded of Jesus when he was telling us that we are the salt of the earth. And it's so encouraging to see that what started in rural Zambia has gone on to the ends of the earth. And really grateful for you just sharing the foundational principles. And yeah, I'm glad that we have Robbins with us as well. And Robbins is going to come and share in a bit, but I'd also like to introduce him for the sake of those who have not interacted with him. Robbins is a social worker and a community trainer with over 16 years working with the youth and the community. He has facilitated programs on HIV, reproductive health, and behavior change programs. He also has experience as a counselor working with populations at risk. Robbins is passionate about working with communities to find alternative ways of living a dignified and better livelihood. He is currently the cluster network lead for Arukah Network and has helped pioneer a number of clusters in Africa. And he believes that SALT has played a huge role in all this coming together. And so, Robbins, it's my pleasure to welcome you. Feel free, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Oscar. My apologies if the background might be a little bit noisy. I wasn't able to get to a good quiet place where we have a nice conversation. But nonetheless, thank you so much for introducing me. I'm just going to mention a little bit about how local listening using SALT happens. And SALT is a way of having a meaningful conversation with the local people or groups. It's a very simple idea, but its impact in a community can be quite huge. So Ian has already mentioned about the acronym of SALT, so I'm not going to mention that. When planning for a SALT visit, it's very important that certain things need to be done. And I think with some of the guidelines that we are able to get access to, people can be trained on how to carry out a SALT visit. So normally a SALT visit is when a group of 2 or 3 people who care about their community visit a local household or an organization. And they might be with a specific reason, maybe to learn about people's health or way of life, or maybe it might be simply to better understand their community and build relationships. So building relationship is very important in SALT, because it helps to build. I mean, it helps a lot in terms of unpacking and also getting people to trust you and open up to you and share their private or personal information with you, because when they open up, that's when you really get to know them more. And that means building a healthy relationship is very important in a SALT visit. And either way, the intention is to go and meet with their host for about maybe an hour or two and ask questions about their life and their work to understand and appreciate the host strengths and to affirm things they are doing, and also to hear stories and learn about their life. So after a SALT visit, for example, if you had a group that is big, and it would be advisable to have a small group to when conducting a SALT visit, because if it is big, then it might be advisable to split it into small groups of very few people. Then later after the visit, then the groups can meet together. They share the lessons and the experiences they had during the SALT visits. It really helps to learn and also to reflect. If the group is big, sometimes because if you receive a huge number of people coming to your household together, then a lot of people tend to get scared and they close, as opposed to the intention, which is to help allow them to share their stories. So if they close, then that SALT visit is counted not to be a very successful one. So through the process of learning and also about getting to build relationship, and people, you can always make a number of SALT visits, and maybe as time goes by, there'll always be something that you learn from that particular group you're visiting, and also something that they also get to learn from you. And by reaffirming their efforts and strengths, they will continue to do the good things that they're doing, and they'll stop looking for sympathy, but stepping forward and taking the actions that are required of them to be able to change their situation to a better one. So over time, with the more SALT visits, a number of families and organizations are in the process of building trust, and the local relationship in turn helps in reaching out to people and also getting people to give a helping hand for situations or issues that they are comfortable handling. So before doing a SALT visit, it's important that you plan, and somebody needs to be in touch with the host family and inform them, and also ask for their permission to spend an hour or two with the group that will be visiting. And by so doing, it helps the group or the family or the organization that is getting visited to prepare psychologically, and also to know that they're going to receive visitors. So if only 2 or 3 of you want to make a visit, that's fine. And just like I mentioned, if it's a bigger group, it's important that splitting that group really help. There was an incoming call. Splitting will help to enable them make sure that it is very effective and you get the most out of that visit. And SALT visit must also have a purpose. Like the person or the group of people that are making a visit to a family or an organization, you need to clearly establish your purpose for that visit, so that all the members in that team are informed of why they are making that visit. It will really help to pick lessons. And surprisingly, you might be in a group, but the lessons that each person will pick when you later on meet and you you share out from your visit, you'll realize that each and every individual was able to pick something different. It might be there might be common issues or common areas that you all learned together, or so something that might need an attention or you are able to share on. But there are things that might be very specific to individuals. So that's why meeting to share after the SALT visit is important, and also it helps in planning for the next visit. And also this relationship that you build with these individuals, it is also based on honesty and trust, because you cannot get into people's personal space if they won't allow you unless they get to trust you. And by having a conversation, you are able to get to learn more from them. Something else that I also want to mention, when making a SALT visit, you're not going as an expert. You don't carry notebooks and pens, and you don't go and introduce yourself as somebody that is very important, but rather just a simple interaction, the same way you can interact with your family members and siblings and other relatives, is the best approach. That if you give a SALT visit, then you can get the most out of it. Because if you go as an expert, people will intend to lock and expect to hear more from you. But it's a two-way traffic. The more you hear from them, you motivate, you encourage them to continue sharing more, then the more you get to learn from them. And also you get to see where some of your experience and skills will come into their conversation. And it's a win-win situation. At the end of the day, they'll also be able to learn something from you, and then to transfer knowledge and experience that during the visit. So maybe perhaps if there's something I've missed, Elvis can be able to fill in the gaps. Thank you. Brian, you're on mute.
There we go. Sorry. Just saying thank you. I've also had the pleasure of doing SALT visits together with you, and I love the fact that it's not something that, as much as you're planning it, you're not going in as an expert with all the answers, but rather it's an environment that you're cultivating where you're listening, and in that moment, trust is being built together so that the people that you're with can get to see the strengths that they have. So that's really good. Thank you for sharing, Robbins. And I might add that if any of us have any questions for Robbins, for Ian, or even for Elvis as he comes on board, just feel free to share those in the chat section. And at the end, we'll just have a time of answering those questions. I'm going to move on to Elvis. I'm going to introduce him, and then I'm going to hand over the floor to him. Elvis is a retired health services director who's qualified in health service development and management of NGOs. He has previously worked for the Salvation Army's Health Services, the Churches Health Association of Zambia, and later for the government at a district level. He currently provides consultation and facilitation for both AFAM and Arukah network. But above all, I found Elvis to be a friend, and I have had the privilege of staying with him while I was in Zambia. And I can tell you that conversations with Elvis are full of wisdom and laughter based from the experiences that he's had. And so I'm so glad to be welcoming Elvis today. Elvis, the floor is yours. Are you there, Elvis? Probably muted.
Elvis, you might be on mute. You need to unmute yourself.
Brian, while we're getting Elvis back, I think you've really highlighted a couple of really significant things when you said the trust emerges. You said it about 3 times actually already. I've been thinking a lot about the trust reemergence around the world, actually. You need it locally to make it work nationally and internationally. And so there's something fundamentally really foundational about the recovery of trust between people where they live.
Yeah.
As well as where they come to hospital or come to church. People have to find a sense of trust together. But
Can you hear me now?
Off he goes. So he's going to talk about it. Yeah.
Yes, Elvis, we can hear you.
Oh, thanks. I can't use the video because it will compromise sound. I'm in rural Zambia.
That's fine, Elvis.
Okay. I'll try to avoid giving a lecture. I'll have a mixture of stories and helps raise issues for discussion as I talk. The way I could begin is to say it's very critical to understand what SALT really is, the building blocks. I think number one, it is faith-based. Every time I talk salt, I always think of what Jesus said. You are the salt of the earth. Normally we think of salt and relish, but I think he meant something much deeper than that. And 2, salt is a mission in worship. The other thing is salt appreciates and affirms an individual, community, or even organization's frame of reference. By this, I mean every time you meet a person or you walk into a community, realize that they have a frame of reference. A Christian will use the Bible. And I mean, that's just an example. So we must always be conscious of the presence of a frame of reference from an individual, from a community. SALT emphasizes practice. I think Ian talked about experiential learning. It's not sitting at your desk and coming up with theories. It's actually going into the village, into the community, and that's where you will actually get a very powerful feedback. SALT is about reflection. This is very critical. You have to find time after a day, so after visits into the community, get together, pray, reflect on what you have learned. More, SALT is actually about learning. I would say 98% of individuals and companies that succeed have used this tool very effectively, listening and learning very closely. And SALT looks for strengths. You walk into a community, you meet an individual, don't look for what is lacking, look for what their strengths are. Don't look at problems, look at concerns. Problems, I always say problems are a negative way of praying. But when you look at concerns, you're looking at the root, and together you'll be able to actually bring it out. The interesting part about me is my journey into SALT practice, which started in a very funny way. We worked together with Ian, and I won't ask him to say anything on this. We worked together at Chikankata. I was looking at the business side of the health services, and he was the chief medical officer. And normally I was the one who went to buy drugs and supplies. And this time I had the list of drugs needed. I was walking away from the ward, going back to the office, when I met him on the way. He stops me and says, "Listen, Elvis, you're not buying drugs this time." And I'm like, "Whoa, why?" He says, "No, I will explain later, but we are not spending money on drugs." So I walked away wondering what had gone wrong. And I think there was a lot of purchasing of antibiotics. And this is the HIV time. I should have mentioned it earlier. But then at night, some of the doctors came to my home and they're like, what did Ian say? And I shared, and they said, no, we need the drug. We have to buy drug. That put me in a compromising situation. I was like, now who do I listen to? Because the night visit was with the senior medical officer. And remember, I actually said Ian at the time was the chief medical officer. But then somehow I decided I would listen to what the chief medical officer said. And as I talk, pick out the impacts. I'm placing them in my storytelling. So I did not buy the drugs. And what Ian said later to me in summary was, let's listen to what the community think and say over this issue. So that's how community visits started. This is from me. There are other things that happened, that did not involve me. We started going into the communities and there was a lot of suspicion. But one thing that managed to carry us all the time was before we left, we prayed, we worshiped. And if you asked me, this actually helped in our relationships with the community. Suspicions started disappearing and slowly they started accepting. The other thing we did was we went in there not as experts. We went in there as human beings, including them who were on the same level. And the question, the way we asked our questions, how do we resolve this situation? Because people were dying. There was actually hunger as well in the community. There's one thing among the many comments that I got at the time. At one moment, the chief said, my son, how do you fight something that is standing at the door? I looked at him and I said, what do you mean? He says, sex is standing at the door. The others laughed. I was quiet for a while thinking about what he meant. And what he then later said, when I said, what do you think? He says, no, find another way of doing things. Find a way of how you can open and go in. I still think that's how the person who came up with condoms thought as well. What the chief was saying, change the way you think and change the way you are working. We took that in. It was a very important statement. This led for us to actually develop concepts that Ian alluded to. These are the transferable concepts. Change, the way we approached the change together with the community was one, we stopped being providers and started looking for or seeking for codependence. Two, we realized that management had to change and not managing change, which is sometimes what we try to do. Management had to change and not managing change. And then we realized that initiatives should come from all of us. The only role leadership would play is hold on to context and objective. In this case, we all wanted to be well. So that was what we expected of leadership. The result was a change of vision. I remember sitting with staff in Chikankata this time, talking about how do we do it now. We had to change our vision statement. We had to redesign who we called ourselves. From Chikankata Mission Hospital, we became Chikankata Health Services. That way you meet wellness, a holistic approach. And you will be interested to realize that even Charles Churches Health Association of Zambia changed that as well, from Churches Medical Association of Zambia to health services. RITN is another example, a regional network changed from a research unit to a training unit. And actually, I think the most important thing that came out of it all was this beginning of home care. At the time, we called it home-based care. This was coming from the community who were saying, we actually prefer to have people die with us in our homes. Community. Every community, like I said earlier, has a frame of reference. And we honored that. And what we started looking for, because in the community, if you go in through stories, through songs, they actually have a dialogue. A dialogue is different from a conversation. A dialogue is different from a discussion. Actually, when you talk discussion, I always think of that sport discussion. But one thing I found very interesting is in the communities, there is a very high level of emotional intelligence, which is very different from academic intelligence. Emotional intelligence is about life, about faith. And then there was love and care. Love your neighbor, Jesus said. But there's one book that I read that really touched me, or I always think about it when I talk loud. The Alchemist, where this guy says, where the water says, no, every time I looked into the face of this guy, I saw myself. That is a strong prerequisite to practicing salt. Love your neighbor. Normally, I struggle with that statement because I don't know how I love myself, but I take it as actually a very powerful one. The other one is never do anything that you don't love. Never. Be it a job, a relationship, don't. Go for something you're passionate about, something there is a lot of enthusiasm. If you look at the word enthusiasm, it actually means God within. It's when you do something out of love, when you actually meet with God. And the other thing is listen. I did mention about 98%. When you listen, when you are present with someone, they recognize it, they feel it. And then your success when you are doing so is very high. Coming to transfer, I'll briefly just say, we were amazed by what we had started, the journey we had started, because within a very short time, we had people pouring in, looking for what we were doing, looking at what we were doing, looking for answers. We were not teachers. We listened to them. And from their feedback, it strengthened our position. Home care became a worldwide thing. And because of this, we still are able at the moment to travel around, share experiences, of course, bringing in new dimensions, new ways of working and thinking. But basically, I should repeat, SALT is faith-based. Jesus is the leader. And you will be surprised how a spiritual journey can actually walk its own path and drag you along as you go. There's a lot of joy in doing that. I think that's all I would want to share, but don't ask questions. Hello.
Hi, thank you, Robbins.
Elvis.
Elvis, sorry, thank you, Elvis. Well, lots of wisdom right there about salt. And we're right now in the last 15 minutes where we can ask any questions that we may have. My question, and this is to either three of you, is let's say I've decided that I want to go and do a salt visit, and I have prayed and I have gathered myself. Is there a list of questions that I should have in mind, or should I just go and just spark conversation, or how does the process usually work for those people who are here and may be wondering how exactly they can just start once they've gotten to somebody's house?
Maybe I try to respond. Just like Elvis has also mentioned that whatever you do it with love. And that reminds me, when you're making a salt visit, and then when you look at the person and you see them as yourself, if you are coming up with questions you want to ask, it's as if now you are conducting something with a lot of love, and therefore, even the kind of questions you'll be asking, they are not asked for the sake of getting an answer, but you ask them from the deep down your heart, and therefore it will help guide the process of a salt visit. For instance, you'll find like maybe you might have some questions in mind on how you want to go and approach it. But when you get there and you hear their stories, it will definitely change the whole scenario. And the present situation will play a major role in helping you to come up with questions. And sometimes if it is a second salt visit, it might be a continuation of what you discussed earlier, or a feedback that you're now receiving that will trigger the next course of action.
Yeah. Maybe I could chip in, Brian, very quickly, if I may. The pattern of questions in the back of the mind of every teammate of the 2, 3, or 4 is a critical foundation. So it's not the exact question, what are your concerns? It's exploration of concerns. It's exploration of, on the backdrop of concerns, worries that mums and parents have and neighborhoods have about not accessing health, or about conflict that's going on, about the costs of doing health better. These are just some of the issues, but really it's about intergenerational connectivity. It's about loss of the next generation. It's about deep grief. So you want to explore sensibly, and as a skilled team together, skill comes with experience, the concerns and also the best hopes that people have. What's the vision they have for the future that works for them? And in the line with that, how are they achieving that, if at all? Or how are they trying to achieve it? You know, it's not as though you have to go and say, well, how are you changing things? It's, how would you like to change things if you had a chance? Who would help? How do neighbors get together to do that? How do you see people like ourselves coming from a nearby hospital or church or something? How do you see us playing a part? And it's that sort of sense of being equal sharers at the table. It's a conversation that is intentionally about the local story, but you don't have to hit it with a big hammer. You know, you have to explore concerns, hopes, ways of working. That's why it takes a while. It takes 30 to 45 minutes usually to get somewhere deep with that. So that's my reflection back to you on how it kicks off. I think a bridge person, if you're setting up a cluster, a gathering of some sort, and you're trying to do this for the first time, having people who trust you from the local setting, who can actually guide into streets and neighborhoods and homes, is really critical. And I think you mentioned that early on. I think that with that sort of framework approach to team-based questioning, you actually end up going somewhere. I can think of many times when it's been impossible to think of what another question would be, but a teammate will think of that. They will take up another thread and they'll take it forward and it stays on track. I mean, you know, there's some thoughts on how you go about it.
Yeah. Thank you both. That actually is very helpful. We have in the comments, we have a couple of Tiafan colleagues from Nigeria. They're saying that they like the interesting discussions happening. We have a question from Christabel. Christabel is based in Benin. And she says that once a group of people walk into a community, the community believes that you have something to offer in order to make their life better. How then can we do a salt visit with such aspirations from the community?
My quick comment, and then it's over to Elvis and Robbins. You've got 30 seconds or 60 seconds maximally as a team to establish an environment in which truth and transparency is known to be there. In other words, you have to communicate something about yourselves and about them in that first minute or two. To do that, you have to actually greet them properly. As you've said, you have to seek names. You have to be prepared to introduce yourself by name and not by your title. You said that yourself. You've got that short window of opportunity. If indeed you also have a bridge person who's known to the community as part of the team, it really helps. And then you can get into, during the conversation, you can dig down deep, people take agency, and by the time you walk out again, that sense of expectation about commodity has shifted, as Elvis has said, more often than not, to a shared realization that that story matters and that the journey together matters, and that, you know, people are not going to be left on their own. There's going to be follow-up to this process in some way. And I think that helps shape the expectations. But there's a really critical dynamic to watch for in this whole question of shifting expectations.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. Just to mention also, it's important to prepare for a salt visit. You don't walk into a family or a group of people to conduct a salt visit, but as we mentioned earlier, preparation that you make before you do an actual salt visit is also very important. So whoever is connecting you with that particular group that you are visiting should also help them understand that they're expecting this kind of group of people or this kind of individuals that are coming, and their purpose for their visit is they just want to come and learn from you or get to understand your lifestyle or how you work or things like that. So it will help clarify and remove unexpected expectations, because if you go for an actual salt visit before they were prepared, and that is when now your salt visit might not be very successful. But whoever is connecting you might also help inform you of maybe misunderstandings or issues or cautions that you need to take, so that when you'll be making the visit, then you give it an holistic approach in trying to understand the situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Robbins. I can see a question from the chat from Dr. Abraham, who is asking if SALT is a process or a program. When you start SALT in a community, is there a time to close that engagement? And I can see your hand is raised, Isaac. You'll have a go after this question has been asked.
Salt is a lifestyle. Oh, sorry, go for it, Robbins.
That is a very interesting question. I think it comes from the way we are used to. I think salt should actually be understood as a lifestyle. It's supposed to, should I use the word organic? Once you plant the seed, it grows and grows on its own, and don't give it timelines or whatever. It should actually be something that goes on.
question becomes, how do you apparently like sustain it and like close the engagement, quote? That's the question. I don't think, Elvis is right, I don't think the engagement is ever meant to close, but propagation of expansion is a key strategic question. You know, we're not after numbers at first, but quality. Quality generates transferability, and then the numbers come. I usually find that in a given setting, say, you know, a district population, you need to chip away at this for a year, where a SALT team that multiple SALT teams that say come out of a working group of 30 or 40 people. I'm having Sierra Leone in my mind as I speak, and also DRC. You need to go back and visit like regularly. You don't just visit and then let it go cold. You got to get back to a particular locality within a month in order for the flourishing to really begin to show itself over a period of a year. And the big outcome in a year is trust. There's a resetting of expectations. And by that time as well, there's an emergence of local facilitators who actually see how to do this and how important it really is. And invitations are coming from all sides to actually come and have it, you know, done differently in other places. And so in a second year, classically, you begin to see people taking responsibility for their own actions. It's not closed off. Action starts to take place, and that's another result. It's an outcome, if you like. Health-related action is what we're often looking for, but that definition is very broad. I think by year 3, classically, you begin to see organically the distribution of response, the expansion of it, and that's what we should be looking for. So you do get the classic health indicators emerging, but you get other things as well. You begin to see the emergence of community relationship variables that are about respect and integrity and connectivity and reconciliation. And you get then to see the significance of community and faith as cofactors in the long-term impact. So that's why it doesn't close off. It keeps going. It is organic. It's just that the catalyzing group might well be distant after a year or 2 or 3, but they can't be too distant over that initial. If we want to be serious about moving forward as a movement, we want to be engaged for a significant period in order to give it enough time to kick off and keep moving. But we can't own it. We have to belong to it, and we have to be smart about the stimulation of the strategy of facilitation of the expansion of response if we want to both engage, but also disentangle ourselves at the right time so that we can get on and do it in another location as well. I hope I've made myself fairly clear around this framework of timeline, of engagement. Do we close off? No, but how do we distribute so that we don't take ownership in the wrong way and wear ourselves out at the same time?
Thank you, Ian. Isaac, are you able to unmute and ask any question you had?
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. We're given the invitation to come. Actually, we didn't know what it is, but we're getting the understanding of the SALT. We're actually, what I told the participants from Nigeria, that we're coming to look at what may benefit us on the approach we have around church and community transformation. I don't know if anyone is familiar with that. So my question is, do you have any manual that could tell us more about that? That's one. Number 2, is there any training that one could get to know all about? Because I noticed that the speakers are talking from a point of experience, and you could hear words of wisdom from what they're saying. So is there any manual around that or training? And then lastly, is there any a contact? We want to get to know someone who will tell us more about it. Just the way we received, come for this training and we went obediently. Thank you so much for telling us. So we joined late because we had an issue with our link. So thank you so much. Sorry, I'm the Church and Community Transformation Officer for TEFON Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brian, I think there are a number of documents out there. Elvis and Robbins are working with us. They know what they're also using. SALT is resonant with a lot of other appreciative inquiry approaches and community transformation mindset and vision that TEFON has worked with Leviticus in so many parts of the world. What SALT does, it helps take it to the local living space in a very concrete, tangible way. And so it's potentially very synergistic. Documents, methodologies. I showed a document, a book at the end that is called Walking with Communities. That is one. There are many other manuals and short protocols that we've got out there. Ted's book, Ted Lancaster's book, has a chapter in it that is about SALT and responding strategically to it. In that chapter, it's just like a 20-page thing. It's quite, I suggest it's quite a good thing to look at. And if Ted's still online, he might be able to speak to
that. Thank you very much. I've hugely enjoyed this conversation. I've learned nearly all that I have, all that I know about this subject from Ian over the years. But he was the primary author, with one or two others, of a book. The name of the book is, I'm wondering if somebody, are you able perhaps, Sarah, to put that in the chat box, the name and details of the book. It's called Setting Up Community Health and Development Programs, published by Oxford University Press. There are about 26, 27 chapters about everything to do with sort of community engagement and so forth. And there is a chapter which Ian has primarily written. Thanks. That's the earlier version. There was three versions before. Thank you, Deirdre. But there's now a new one, which is green. But there is a very good chapter in that, which Ian has written, and it gives a really good idea of the background, how you do it, what it all means, diagrams, what the SALT, S-A-L-T, really stands for. So I recommend that you don't necessarily need to buy the book. You can download it free, and there are the details about how you can do that. Also, you're more than welcome to be in touch with any of us in the Arukah team, and we can tell you more. Thanks.
Thank you, Ted. I'm wary of time, and I'd like to bring us to a close. Thank you so much for all the questions that you put, and thank you, Ian and Elvis and Robbins, for your contribution. I'd say if you have any more questions, feel free to reach out to myself or Ian or Robbins, and we'd be happy to send any answers your way. My email is brian@arukahnetwork.org. That's how you can reach me, and I can be able to connect you with either Ian or Elvis or Robbins or Ted. Again, it's been a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for joining. And with that said, have yourselves a lovely day ahead, and God bless you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Nice to meet.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.